Hey friends, we are back at it with another example, two to be exact, of figurative language today. But before I teach you these new poetry elements, I want to pause and think about the ones we already know and ask ourselves what they do for poems and why poets choose to use them. So hopefully you'll remember that poets use similes and metaphors to provide their readers with comparisons, and they can also use personification to give something that is not a human, actual human qualities. And those three types of figurative language help us to better understand what the poet is writing about. It helps us to create these mental movies in our minds. And the way that it can do that is obviously if you're giving human qualities to something, the reader is going to understand it better because we are, after all, humans. And if you are using similes and metaphors and making comparisons, then I can better understand something that's unknown if you compare it to something that is known. The other type of figurative language that we have talked about is alliteration. And that is where the poet will use the same beginning sound more than one time in close proximity with a couple of different words. That type of figurative language has a different use. Poets will use that to add to their rhythm. Poets will use that to make it more fun to read, to make it more memorable if we're trying to memorize it. So today is a perfect lesson for figurative language because we are going to be learning two different types, and they each fit into different subcategories, like I just explained. So assonance is going to be used to develop the rhythm of a poem using some sounds and words similar to alliteration, and onomatopoeia is going to be put into a poem to further our imagery, to help us use one of our five senses that we don't normally use when we are reading text. So let's find out a little bit more. As I said, assonance is similar to alliteration in the sense that it focuses on the sounds in a word, not the meaning, but the sounds. However, a difference between alliteration and assonance is that assonance focuses only on the vowel sound. So if a poet wants to incorporate this type of figurative language, they are going to need more than one word close to each other in the line of a poem with the same vowel sound. And here's the tricky part: non-rhyming. It can't rhyme. So you obviously know your vowels are A, E, I, O, and U, so any of similar sounding vowels from this list would work, but also diphthongs, which are vowel pairs sometimes, or also if you add a consonant to a vowel, it can change the whole sound. So these pairs right here say aw, here's our oo, our oi, and our ow. So any of these sounds that are close to each other and repeating would be considered assonance. So here's a quick example. She sells seashells by the seashore. The shells she sells are seashells, I'm sure. So if she sells seashells on the seashore, then I'm sure she sells seashore shells. Obviously, we have alliteration, right? So many S and SH sounds, but did you know that also in this tongue twister we have assonance? We have two different vowel sounds that keep repeating. One is the long E sound, like in she and E. The other is the short E, though, like in cells, that sound, and it's also in shells. Here's another example of assonance. This is in another short poem called I'm Glad I'm Not a Firefly. Here's this one. I'm glad I'm not a firefly, for I suspect I'd mind a permanent electric light attached to my behind. So as you see in the highlighted parts, the sound that repeats, how this poem gets qualified as a poem with assonance is because it has the long I sound. I'm, fire, I, mind. So you might be asking yourself, it seems pretty difficult, right, to make sure you're getting the same vowel sound. Why would a poet do that? Well, as I mentioned, it adds to the rhythm. As soon as I note that there are examples of the same vowel sounds, it helps me kind of stress those words, like this. I'm glad I'm not a firefly, for I suspect I'd mind a permanent electric light attached to my behind. Right? You can read it with a little bit more inflection and you have a little bit more rhythm as you're reading. Let's take a peek at onomatopoeia. The short version of this that I use with my third graders is I say sound words, right? It's when a poet or really any author creates a word that is supposed to mimic a sound. Like buzz might be the sound of a bee, whoosh might be the sound of wind blowing, boom might be a firework. Let's take a look at a poem that has this. So I'll just read it line by line like I normally would in poetry. Oh crash, my bash, it's bang, the zang, fourth whoosh of Baroom, July, whoo. Now I'm kind of understanding that the poet might be describing lots of noises going on, and I see the word July, so maybe it's the 4th of July. But look at what happens when I start to recognize and take note of just the sound words, of just the onomatopoeia. Crash, bash, bang, zang, whoosh, baroom, woo! Oh my, it's the 4th of July. Wow, makes much more sense, right? And as I'm reading this, not only does it organize the poem better for me, but in my mind, I am thinking of these different sounds that go along with these different images of all of these fireworks and all the loud celebrations that take place over the 4th of July. So why would an author add onomatopoeia? It's creating imagery. How often do you hear things when you're reading a story? Well, usually we might be feeling them, or we're definitely seeing the words, but now we can actually hear what's going on as soon as onomatopoeia is added. You are going to get a chance to find assonance and onomatopoeia in sound lyrics. You're probably thinking, this is not in our music Zoom. Why are we doing music right now? Well, as you might recall, in the beginning of our poetry unit, one type of poetry is called lyrical. Oftentimes, song lyrics are a form of poetry. Have fun!